Welcome to the second live episode of The Critical Catholic. I'm Mike Lewis, and I'm joined once again by David Lafferty, PhD.
Thanks.
I hope you enjoyed our theme song. The timing was a little bit better. We built in a couple of seconds of black airtime, blank airtime, so you could see the whole mini snippet of the song. So
we're getting the hang of this now. It's coming.
Yeah, exactly. The special effects will be coming next week. Speaking of special effects, actually, this has nothing to do with special effects. Today's topic is going to be a lot of these conspiracy theorists, people who are spreading misinformation, pseudoscience, pseudo-theology, have encountered, they've been banned by social media platforms. Recently, LifeSiteNews was banned from Facebook, in addition to their earlier ban from YouTube. Podcaster and former Catholic Answers radio host Patrick Coffin was just booted from YouTube as well. And being a podcaster, that was sort of his bread and butter. That was his livelihood because of repeated instances of spreading misinformation about COVID and about the election and about the vaccine. And recently, last weekend, he was going to hold a conference that we discussed last week called Truth Over Fear, but his web hosting company declined to host him. And so they postponed it a week, and then they went ahead and they did have the conference over the past couple of days. You're on it. I registered for it, and I didn't have much time. Apparently the window to watch for free closed at 2:30 this afternoon Eastern time. But it was the usual lineup of anti-vax or COVID denialist Catholics. Bishop Athanasius Schneider spoke at it. The keynote speaker, by audio only, pre-recorded, was Archbishop Carlo Maria Vigano, of the former Apostolic Nuncio to the U.S., but he's become well known for other things in the last couple of years. And there was also a priest, Father Michael Copenhagen, he's an Eastern Rite Catholic priest who's based out of, I believe, Rochester, New York, maybe Albany, upstate New York. So there, 3 clerics, including 2 bishops, took part in it. But the rest of the lineup was a who's who of anti-vaccine conspiracy theory, of COVID denial conspiracy theory, of anti-virus conspiracy theory. Viruses don't make you sick. One of the speakers, I believe that's his thing. And it's funny because you see these people pop up around the internet. There's like a speaker circuit, I guess, and they all show up at these events and give these talks, and they've developed a pretty big audience for it. So we're going to talk about. So David's got some notes prepared to talk about some of these things and how exactly the internet has influenced Catholics in the last couple of years, has challenged those of us who it's really demonstrated a lack of critical thinking among a large segment of Catholics. And so that's something that we try to address here. So, David, I don't know if you have any comments on that before we jump into our prayer and start the discussion.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think the key, of course, is critical thinking, and also taking the time to figure out where are these voices coming from, these people that we're hearing at these conferences, these people that we're seeing articles about. Really take the time. Just all it usually takes is a simple Google search. Where are these people coming from? Where else do they speak? What other publications are they in? Once you start doing that, you get the larger picture. And I think that's one of the things that we can try to do here is maybe paint a larger picture to show how this stuff enters the online sort of conspiracy ecosphere as a whole, and then how it gets filtered into the Catholic media in particular. So maybe we can look at these kind of one by one. But maybe we should we'll start with a quick prayer just to get ourselves on the right track. So in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Heavenly Father, please guide us in our discussion. Help us to dispel confusion, discern fact from fiction, and cleave to the truth. Allow us to contribute to the creation of a healthy Catholic media culture. In the name of the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. Amen.
So why don't we start with LifeSiteNews?
Sure.
Obviously, since the beginning of this papacy, they started out, I think, like a lot of outlets, trying to defend Pope Francis. Obviously, they always had a very political slant. I mean, being Canadian, but they do have an attachment. They do have a lot of staff in the U.S. and always been close to the GOP party, and in terms of pro-life absolutism, I guess, for lack of a better word, like were certain politicians up to their standards? I had noticed some loose reporting in the past. Like, I know they totally misinterpreted Paul Ryan, I think, back in, what year did he run for vice president? 2012.
Yeah.
I remember there was an article where they sort of put things in quotes. Like he did an interview on some mainstream news channel where he was asked, well, what do you have to say to pro-choice people who might want to vote for you? And he's like, well, there are certain areas where we can collaborate, and where we do see eye to eye. We don't agree on this issue, but I encourage you to vote for us. And I remember their report was that he was both sidesing, and that there was room for everybody in the Republican Party and all that. But it was really, I mean, he wasn't compromising his own position. He was just responding to the fact that there are people out there who disagree, and being a politician, he was just trying to get their vote. But it wasn't to this extreme, I don't think. I mean, I know that you've written about the origin story of LifeSiteNews.
Yeah.
But what I've noticed, and this is the thing that kind of confounds me, is they had their political message, but they also were very strongly in favor of reporting on or they wanted to report on the pro-life movement. They wanted to support the pro-life movement. They were very invested in the church. They were very invested in obviously calling out things in the church that they didn't approve of. During the papacy of Pope Francis, I believe, we personally saw a lot of that as distortion or innuendo or unverifiable or inaccurate translations or that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But what they got kicked off social media platforms was not pro-life advocacy. It wasn't their faith. So it wasn't their freedom of religion or their moral beliefs that got them kicked off. The hill that they chose to die on were rumors that, well, one article in particular, that people were being killed by the COVID vaccine.
Yeah. So according to the official Facebook statement, their page was unpublished. I guess that's the official term they use. And the reason was that they were, and this is a quote, going against the Facebook community standards on health misinformation that could cause physical harm. So, health misinformation that could cause physical harm. If you post a video saying, hey, it's a great idea to take 25 tablets of Tylenol before you go to bed, that's extremely dangerous information. That's not, you're kind of leaving the realm of freedom of speech, because again, there are people who could potentially do that. They would see that, they think you're an authoritative source, and they might actually just go do it because you said it was okay. So I mean, no company is going to want to be held liable for that kind of thing if that happens. And really, the COVID misinformation stuff is an extension of that sort of principle. If you go around telling people that masks don't work, or if you go around telling people that vaccines are far more dangerous than they actually are, you discourage people from taking them, all that kind of stuff, you're really leaving the realm of opinion, and you're getting into the realm of, well, for one thing, you're going against the kind of general consensus of scientists. And sometimes, in certain situations, that might be appropriate if we're talking about things where it's not an imminent matter of life and death for a lot of people.
But in the middle of a pandemic.
In the middle of a pandemic, this is a big thing. So, I mean, that's the thing we got to remember. These are not normal times where, this is kind of a sort of emergency situation all over the world. So you can get away with more during kind of normal times, right? When people have the ability to kind of take a step back and think a little more. But when there's this, imminent threat, then no, you really can't do that. Now, I know LifeSite very well because I followed them for a long time because they're a bit of a fixture in Canada. So, like you said, they evolved out of a group called Campaign Life Coalition, they're a sort of alliance formed among various pro-life groups in Canada, and I'd say they're the predominant pro-life organization in Canada. They're certainly the one anyway that is out there the most. If you go on the internet looking for anything to do with pro-life stuff in Canada, it's going to be Campaign Life stuff that you're going to find. And for a long time, their kind of thing was pushing for legislative change. So they would identify political candidates who expressed pro-life opinions and say, vote for this person, vote for this person. It was an extremely calculated way of approaching the issue, because that was really the only thing they were judging these candidates on.
But I mean, that's their right. I mean, I guess that's right, the thing. Yeah. I mean,
it's a strategy that early on, I kind of realized, I don't know. I want to think about other things too. I want to be able to balance, also in Canada, the pro-life cause, if you're thinking of it as a purely political cause, it's a very difficult one. So it'll be a long time, I think, before we actually have any kind of significant, pro-life movement in our political sphere. It's very different from the US in that respect. But this is totally legitimate stuff, and they're allowed to do that. LifeSiteNews started in the 90s as the sort of online news source for people interested in the pro-life movement, and it was put out by Campaign Life Coalition. Now, over time, it became its own sort of entity. But there's still, I don't know if there are official ties still between LifeSite and Campaign Life, but they certainly tend to operate in the same zones. Like this week coming up is our March for Life in Ottawa. We're under a lockdown right now, an emergency. There's a stay-at-home order. I believe they've said that they're still going to go ahead and have at least some kind of a gathering on Parliament Hill, although other stuff is going to be online. But often you'll get people like LifeSite is usually one of the top. It's always one of the top supporters of the March for Life, along with maybe Knights of Columbus. And you get people like John Henry Weston speaking there. So LifeSite is definitely a big presence. So I've watched over time. I mean, no one would ever accuse LifeSite of being balanced and objective. And I don't even think that was necessarily a bad thing. I mean, I used to think that they had some good articles sometimes in the past. Like they got their point across. They were very passionately dedicated to the pro-life cause. They could be shrill, they could be extremely one-sided, but there's nothing wrong with that necessarily. So, but when they started, in my mind, sort of twisting the truth, engaging in sort of like, innuendo and a kind of undermining of confidence in the church. I mean, they'd always been sort of antagonistic to the institutional church to some extent, because the institutional church is never pro-life enough for them.
Well, and I mean, we have that just some degree, to a great degree, in the U.S. as well. I mean,
Yeah,
I got that impression from, I mean, The Wanderer. My grandfather was a longtime subscriber, and my mom was. I mean, basically up until a year ago, I always had a Wanderer that I could consult the latest
yes,
edition. It's funny because the Wanderer was always the bigger one compared to the Remnant, but it seems like they did not. And for people who don't know the history of the Wanderer and the Remnant, they're the same family, the Matt family, MATT. And in 1967, after Vatican II, um, the original, the Wanderer was the original, but one of the brothers or one of the cousins broke off and started the Remnant because of Vatican II. They didn't approve of Vatican II. They embraced the Lefebvre ideology or movement, the SSPX. And so, but the Wanderer was always pretty reactionary too. And they were always bigger than the Remnant because the Remnant was a little bit more fringe. But I always got this sense that, they were with the Pope and they wanted, and Vatican II had to be critiqued in it was valid, but it had to be interpreted in the most strict way in conformity with past tradition. And they would go after bishops mercilessly, relentlessly, but were always claimed that fidelity to the Pope. And I kind of got the same thing from LifeSite.
Yeah, they kind of like started out a bit more like the Wanderer, and then now they've kind of drifted over when it comes to the church and their opinions on things like Vatican II, much more like the Remnant. It's
although the Wanderer is a lot more like the Remnant now.
Yeah,
under Pope Francis. I mean, it's like maybe they can patch things up between the family. Yeah.
There's been this great shift over to the kind of traditionalist side of things among those groups. So the ones that were formerly these kind of ultramontanist, like super conservative Catholics, they kind of drifted into the, especially after Vigano and that sort of stuff happened, drifted into the traditionalist camp, and now we're firmly in that camp.
Well, and the thing is, and sorry to interrupt, but the Remnant, what I was going to say is, I don't know what the subscription numbers are or anything like that, but they seem to have in a lot of ways eclipsed the Wanderer because they've made better use of social media. They made better use of video. And there is actually, a lot of the same events that John Henry Weston attends and that Vigano attends. Like I'm thinking of that rally in Munich, the one time that Vigano has shown his face in public since he went into hiding. I believe both Michael Matt of the Remnant and John Henry Weston were in attendance at that protest.
Yeah, I think they learned, both Remnant and LifeSite learned a lot from 2016 and sites like Breitbart. So when you had say the Breitbart news site, especially when it was under Steve Bannon, you get this sort of incessant pumping out of kind of clickbait articles and real fear-mongering. So this idea that, I think, Bannon has said this before, that it's all about war. Like it's all about this idea that we're at war, and you have to create that feeling among the people who are reading this stuff that like battle is imminent, that the world is collapsing around you, that society is awful, the family is falling apart, there's crime everywhere, there's horrible people trying to take over the system, and every new piece that you put out has to reflect that and amplify that same kind of feeling, right? So definitely the Remnant picked up on that. I see that kind of Bannon-esque aesthetic and way of and sort of way of constructing narratives in a lot of what they do. And same with LifeSite. I mean, if you read LifeSite, you'd be absolutely terrified if you took it seriously. If you really thought that all this stuff was happening, you'd be hiding in your house, thinking that these really are the end times. And especially when you get an actual crisis, like something like COVID, where the world is going through a very difficult time, it goes off into the stratosphere. So that's the kind of rhetoric they've used. And you're right, though, but it wasn't with LifeSite, the pro-life stuff. That was probably the least of people's concerns in a lot of ways, like in terms of the critics of LifeSite. I mean, they certainly have been criticized by pro-choice groups for for maybe spreading misinformation and that sort of thing, or what they consider to be misinformation. But this is still kind of, I think, within the realm of debate. I found that over time their sort of anti-LGBTQ stuff became more and more less based in a sort of charitable presentation of church teaching, and more just I'd have to say it's hate based. Like it's trying to present LGBTQ people and the LGBTQ movement as this evil force trying to take over society, destroy everything that you value. You're trying to get at your kids through the schools, trying to infiltrate the government, that sort of thing. And I think a lot of groups that advocate for LGBTQ people have found that very disturbing. But in the end, it really was the misinformation about COVID that caused them to get banned.
Oh, it was the Al Capone tax evasion.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the thing. One of the things is it's the LifeSiteNews, I think, either on their site or somebody reported that it was like NARAL, Pro-Choice America, and the different Planned Parenthood organizations that were logging these complaints against LifeSite. But LifeSite made themselves vulnerable by spreading misinformation, for violating policy. They knew going in, they've been on these platforms for a decade, and they knew, and they hadn't received those kinds of penalties before. I think they'd had some suspensions maybe here and there for a few days because of graphic photos and that kind of thing. But really, I mean, in the end, it was this misinformation, and they were willing to put, I mean, here they are ostensibly, they exist to promote the pro-life cause, to end abortion, euthanasia, assisted suicide, not necessarily the full breadth of life issues, but at least those. Yeah. And they start this Catholic branch after Pope Francis, which is really an anti-Catholic branch, because it's promoting their view of Catholicism, not the Catholicism that's in communion with the Pope. But they dedicated themselves to that. They made that their mission. Yeah. Let's say in 2015, those were their two causes. And then they threw a lot of that away because
on the COVID stuff.
On the COVID stuff. I mean, it's kind of, I mean, not that I'm not upset to see them go necessarily, because I think that they were being a counter witness in a lot of ways and turning people off to defend the defense of the unborn, because they were too tied to some of these reactionary movements. But I mean, I don't know. To me, it's just astounding
with the amount of money, because they seem to have an incredible amount of money coming in through donations, that allows them to generate so much content and to hire a lot of writers. They could have done so much good. I mean, it's incredible if they had adhered to certain standards and focused on true pro-life issues, like they used to do. They really could have done so much good, because especially in Canada, like right now, like euthanasia is legal. It's a big problem. We need people to talk about it, but no one will take them seriously, and they've kind of discredited a lot of people who would talk about that stuff, because they've tied it to these to this crazy sort of right-wing fringe stuff. You mentioned that, it was the president of NARAL, Pro-Choice America, who put out some tweets saying that it looks like they, like NARAL, I think it was Media Matters for America, Human Rights Campaign, HRC, and GLAAD, which is a pro LGBTQ organization, they may have played a role in bringing the COVID misinformation to Facebook's attention. It sounds like they did, but she was very, very disappointed. So she's like, we'll take this as a win, but she's very disappointed that it wasn't the anti-gay, sort of what they consider hate speech, that got them shut down. It was the COVID misinformation. So even for them, this is kind of like a strange victory, because they had, it took the COVID misinfo to actually get them banned. One thing I wanted to mention was, this did come up on Tucker Carlson. It's funny how these things work. All this stuff kind of bubbles around underneath in the internet sphere, and then some of it ends up getting onto one of the top rated TV shows in the United States. Now Tucker Carlson commented on it, and he was talking about the way that health authorities are cracking down on anyone who questions vaccines. So he says, our health authorities, as a quote, have reserved their energy for anyone who dares to question vaccines. LifeSiteNews, that's a nonprofit news organization, just found itself permanently banned from Facebook. Why? Because it reported government numbers from the VAERS database, something that we just did on the air. So, and the VAERS database is like this vaccine adverse event reporting system. It's run by the CDC and the FDA, and it tracks deaths of any kind that occur after taking vaccines. But that includes natural deaths of any kind, and then you have to interpret all the data. But it's very easy to misinterpret and scare people with it.
Especially since the first batch of people who got the vaccines were mostly over 75.
Yeah, there's some extremely old people here who got this vaccine, and it was there's something like maybe like 3,000 in the U.S. that they've got listed here. I forget what the exact numbers were, but it's incredible that he would just say, LifeSiteNews, this is a non-profit news organization, which is literally true, but it doesn't give any of the sort of context that you would expect. I don't think the government should just be, just slamming the ban hammer on, or health authorities should be slamming the ban hammer on anyone who questions anything to do with vaccines. No, but this is not ordinary questioning, or this is, LifeSiteNews have been conducting a propaganda campaign for a very long time and pushing every bit of misinformation they could find. So taking that out of context, it just becomes part of this sort of like cancel culture narrative that Tucker Carlson is trying to put forward. And that's another thing. We got to make sure we dig and figure out, like, okay, so someone got banned. Okay, well, let's dig a little bit and find out why, right? And in the end, too, it should be mentioned that it wasn't the health authorities that banned them. It was Facebook that banned them. It was
a corporate decision, and I think Facebook, obviously, we hear about like what Parler looks like now, or we've talked about in the past, like 4chan and then 8chan and then 8kun. It's being tied to some of these platforms where a lot of this misinformation and pseudoscience and life-threatening, dangerous stuff happens, can be a real liability, or a potential liability, or it could start a campaign in the mainstream to like avoid this website because your kids might come across whatever. I'm thinking of YouTube. So YouTube, you hear about famous bannings here and there. For the most part, they tend to be copyright banning, somebody appropriating somebody else's, copyrighted song or video or whatever. But another one that really, like, I'm reminded of, well, there are two in particular. For one thing, suicide videos get uploaded to YouTube, and they're banned. They're deleted. They're flagged. They're deleted. They're taken off. To me, that's a good thing. I think they start, like, people will start the live stream going, and then for whatever reason they want to become famous, it's you feel sad, and you feel I mean, obviously the people are going through a lot and it's a tragedy, but to have that broadcast for anyone to see on the internet is, it's inappropriate.
It is, yeah.
The other thing that, I mean, it's almost humorous, but it's not. Like, we all remember like the ice bucket challenge that was a fundraiser, but at another point there was something called the Tide Pod challenge.
Yes,
I don't know if you remember that.
Yes, I
like
do, yeah.
the Tide laundry pellets that people put in the washing machine, and I don't know how many. I think somebody said it as a joke, and then some bright teenagers decided to video themselves. I guess this was before TikTok. That's probably where they'd be doing it nowadays. They would film themselves swallowing a Tide Pod, and they'd get all these hits and become, I guess, famous for all the wrong reasons on YouTube. But YouTube pulled that down because if people copied, just like with the suicide can be a trigger, like trigger. Sorry, but talk of it, or an example. I mean, that's one of the things. Like, don't try this at home. Is the old disclaimer on TV.
Yeah, there was a bit of a panic too about these videos that would try to convince children to commit suicide, right? Like, so children would find these videos, and now I don't know if they existed or not, but certainly if they ever did exist, I think these are videos that most people would have no problem being removed from YouTube. And it's funny when Catholics become suddenly free speech activists, right?
Yeah.
Because I mean, there's no. I mean, I love the Catholic Church. There's no institution in the world, I think, that has quite as bad a record when it comes to freedom of speech, right? Like, it's like we had the Inquisition, right? Like, so, but even in the church now, the post Vatican II church. I was looking through the catechism recently, and if you look in the section on offenses against truth, I really recommend people look at this section because it talks about all these things like false witness, perjury, not having respect for the reputation of others, avoiding rash judgment, all of these things. And they refer to lying as the most direct offense against the truth. And even when it comes to, they say that it says here in the catechism that even the right to the communication of the truth is not unconditional. Everyone must conform his life to the gospel precept of fraternal love. And so we have to judge whether or not it's appropriate to say something that may be true in a given situation. So, even, it's absolutely lies and misrepresentations and insinuations and conspiracies. These things there's just no question that they're absolutely frowned upon by the Catholic Church. And even we need to be careful when we speak the truth to not speak it in a way that's going to cause more harm than good. So I think it would be good if we maybe all reflected a little bit on that. I'm a pretty big believer, actually, like myself, in like a robust sort of freedom of speech. But every society has its limits, and we found where the limits are the last little while. In the United States, it was the COVID misinformation, but also election fraud stuff after January 6th, when this stuff exploded. And, you have people who are attacking the Capitol based on stuff that they read online that had been amplified by the president.
Now, let me back up a little bit here, because while the general consensus, while you and I understand a lot of these things are pseudoscience or based on lies, are inaccurate, these, first of all, I assume, I have to assume, there are probably hucksters in there here and there are people who are trying to profit. But I think that a lot of these a lot of people who embrace these conspiracy theories or have this conspiratorial mindset, they think they're speaking the truth. And so, and that kind of leads to them thinking that they're, not only are they trying to tell the truth, but they're being silenced, which makes them martyrs, which makes them even more outspoken towards their cause. And this is kind of a vicious cycle. I mean, part of me wonders what would happen if they weren't taken off YouTube and Facebook and that kind of thing. My fear is that it would turn into what 8chan and, you know, Parler, MeWe, what, you know, what these various free speech platforms have turned into, which is just cesspools of white supremacy and modern day Nazism and really actually perverse stuff as well. And I just wonder, like, I guess the thing though is, it's like, and I mean, the thing is, I think we've developed this trust historically as Catholics, like we discussed last week. It's like, I mean, I know growing up, or maybe not growing up, but over the last 10 or 15 years in conservative Catholic circles, especially in the US, we had these heroes that we looked to. And you know, these are the champions of orthodoxy. And these are the prelates. These are, you know, EWTN, Raymond Arroyo, so close to Mother Angelica. And then by extension, you got the papal posse, who are, you know, you've got George Weigel, the guy who wrote the book on Pope St. John Paul II, and you've got Cardinal Burke. You know, he was portrayed as one of the good guys. This is the guy. You need to follow him. You need to listen to him. And I guess the thing is, it's like, and that's, I mean, I wrote the piece about Aidan Nichols, the Dominican English theologian. It's like, he was a Vatican II defender, convert to the Catholic faith, well respected. I know he wrote a book that was sort of a back and forth between himself and an SSPX sympathizer about Vatican II and why it was in continuity. And here he is signing this declaration that the Pope is a heretic and claiming that he was wearing a cross that represented LGBT pride, like a rainbow thing, when actually it was a Latin American, and each of the colors represented a country type rainbow. And that the staff that he carried at the Mass was a Wiccan stang or something. I mean, it's like, this is actually, both of which were debunked immediately. A Google search could have given you the true story immediately. If you'd gone to Where Peter Is, we linked to those stories. And here's this really, really smart, really, really respectable, taken for granted that he's Orthodox theologian who's signing this nonsense. Cardinal Burke, the microchips in the vaccines, like it's, I don't know.
I think we've learned, you know, a really, really important lesson as Catholics. I mean, I fell into this too. I thought that, you know, well, if I listen to Catholic media, this is going to be stuff that's based on Catholic teaching. I can't go wrong. I can trust what I'm hearing here. And you know, there's this tendency, you know, and I think, you know, a lot of Catholics have this tendency to kind of, you can bury yourself in this sort of little world of Catholic media and not look outside it, right? And what we've discovered is that, unfortunately, this little world of Catholic media is not at all immune to the kind of twisting of truth that can occur, especially through like politicization and things like that. But also, it's not immune to the conspiracy theories that are out there that can creep in and sort of poison people's thinking. So what I think we have to do is, you know, I think we have a duty as Catholics to look to figure out the whole truth. So it should never be enough for us to just see something and say, oh, that must be true, and just kind of take it at face value. But there really is a duty, I think, to, whenever possible, to just do a little due diligence and a little investigation and look behind what's going on with the information that we're receiving. And that includes information that we're getting from Catholic media. So we need to develop that critical faculty. And unfortunately, so much of Catholic media seem to have been designed to atrophy that critical faculty, right? Because all you have to do is just kind of sit back, surround yourself with EWTN media and just soak it all in, and you're getting all this great truth. But it turns out that wasn't the case at all. And especially with the internet and these kind of rogue sites that claim to represent the Catholic truth, you can get way off base and way into areas that you would have never gone before. Now, I think some people, not everyone maybe has the capacity to do that kind of investigation, which is why I think in extreme circumstances, sometimes you have to clamp down on these things. And, like you have to shut down LifeSite. You have to, make sure that people can't just absorb this stuff through their Facebook. Because unfortunately there are vulnerable people out there who, again, these are the people who unfortunately are the targets for lots of scams and misinformation, like, those phone calls you get about, your credit card has problems and we need your credit card number, that kind of stuff. And they're trusting people. So we got to think about those kind of people too, who can really fall into this stuff hard.
Well, they're trusting,
they're vulnerable,
but they're skeptical. I mean, it's kind of a weird thing. It's sort of a misplaced trust, like they think there's something up with the mainstream narrative, and they deliver their trust to a fringe group instead. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't look at the mainstream narrative critically, but you should maybe use it as a baseline. And here's just a couple of user tips. For example, if you see it, like one of the things that would happen to me regularly, especially early in the papacy, when, even before Where Peter Is, and people would challenge me, well, what about this? What about this thing that Cardinal Marx said, in this interview, and so, or what about this homily that Pope Francis gave during, or this person that he welcomed? And a lot of times they would, I know that Catholic News Agency would do it a lot. LifeSite does it a lot, where they will take excerpts. They will be the first English source to have this story, to have this interview that was in German or Italian originally, or this talk that, that some archbishop that's close to Francis gave in Italian. And they won't link to the original source. There are no original sources in English. Like, I know a lot of the reporting on the German Synod, for example, isn't translated into English. I mean, that was one of the things that we noticed, was that interview with Cardinal Schönborn. A lot of people reported on it, left and right, but nobody actually translated the whole thing so that people could. And thankfully, we had some readers who volunteered to, who, one of whom lives in Vienna, and the other one is a U.S. Deacon Clayton, who he lives in. He's in my archdiocese, actually, and he's German, and he's fluent in German. So I would have them, one of them would translate it, or I would translate it from Google Translate and edit it, and then they would review it. But just to give people full context, and so here's
context is key to so much of this. Yeah.
So if you don't see a link to a full address and all you see are excerpts in an article, and I named two sources that tend to do that, and they don't even link back to the original in the original language. Do an internet search for it. Like, highlight some of the key terms, right click, search Google for this person. Have a Google Translate app, like either a Chrome extension or I don't know, what do they call it in Mozilla Firefox add-on that has Google Translate automatically worked in, and then a little window will pop up saying, this is originally in German. Do you want to read it in English? Now, it's not going to give you 100% especially German to English. It does, that it's a complicated translation, but it'll give you an idea of the fuller context.
And finding out that context may not change your opinion entirely, but at least your opinion will be an informed one. It won't be based on these little fragments that people are quoting, because they go out and they search for fragments that will make people look bad, basically, right? Like they want fragments, especially from people in the church who they consider liberal in any way, anything that might suggest that these people are corrupt or gay or whatever, or pushing for like liberal reforms, that kind of thing. And they'll use that and they'll milk it for whatever it's worth. And I think that's it's a very dishonest way of doing things. You need to look at the whole context. You may still be opposed to this person that you heard about, but at least you'll be able to fully understand why and give a good reasoned argument. I thought maybe in the last 15 minutes we could look at a bit of the Patrick Coffin Truth Over Fear Summit.
Sure.
Because this kind of, encapsulates so much of what we've been talking about. We're getting, this coalescing of all these different strands of conspiracy theory into like one event. And so, we mentioned last week that the Patrick Coffin Summit was, and you mentioned earlier today too, that it was pulled, or it had to be postponed to this weekend. So it ran this weekend, and I had a chance to look at the list of speakers and what they were talking about. And in doing this, I was able to, delineate some of the different sort of camps of conspiracy theory that are coming together at this conference. And it's really fascinating. I mean, you touched on it a little bit, but I'd like to maybe just dig a little deeper into it.
Sure.
So probably over 50% of the people speaking there are what you might call like medical conspiracists, right? So doctors or self-described medical experts who are either opposed to vaccines or who promote natural cures or for often extremely serious diseases, or who question any kind of centralized medical authority. So that's one sort of group. Then you have what I would call the New World Order conspiracists. So that's people like G. Edward Griffin, who's one of the first speakers. He's very well known for his conspiracy theories that go all the way back to people like Ezra Pound or Major C.H. Douglas from the social credit movement.
He's a big chemtrails guy, right?
He's into lots of things. Like that HIV is not HIV does not cause AIDS, or that HIV is not an actual virus or something like that. Basically an HIV denier. And also into chemtrails stuff. But also this overriding idea that bankers use what he calls fiat currency, and central banking institutions like the Federal Reserve to manipulate the money system and gain control over the world. There's another speaker there, Rosa Corey, and she's a New World Order conspiracy theorist, but she sees environmentalism as the sort of cover for the progression of this New World Order, as opposed to Griffin, who sees it more in the banking world. But it's the same idea. Then you have some people who I think are kind of fascinating. I call them the anti-communist conspiracists. And these guys are particularly relevant in the Catholic world right now because of all the criticism of the China deal, the Vatican-China agreement. So Stephen Mosher, he's a Catholic convert. I think he was on EWTN, back in the day, talking about his conversion story. He's now a Bannon associate and a member of this group called Committee on the Present Danger China. And he's been on the world over with Raymond Arroyo. There's also Alex Newman. He writes for the Epoch Times, which is a Falun Gong connected newspaper that is just vehemently anti-China, anti-CCP. So they have this kind of fanatical anti-CCP agenda along with Steve Bannon. That's become his thing now. And a lot. I've seen this stuff come up all the time in the Catholic world, especially in relation to the Vatican-China agreement. Again, we're seeing there's a difference between authentic criticism of, like, say, China. Like, there's much to criticize about China, like the treatment of the Uyghurs and all that stuff, and their really poor track record when it comes to democracy and freedom of speech and all that kind of stuff, human rights. But there's a difference between that and what I feel these guys do, where it's just this exaggerated, Breitbart-like constant stream of anti-China information. Whether it's fair or not, that doesn't matter. They don't care. Whether it's based in fact or not, whatever. As long as it does the work, that's kind of their attitude. So that's another group.
And then they're more than happy to pin it all on Pope Francis and his arrangement with the Catholic Church, with the state church in China.
Absolutely, yeah. And the stuff that I've heard about that, I mean, again, there are legitimate criticisms of the Vatican-China agreement, but usually I don't hear that. I hear this sort of really kind of shrill and almost like fanatical anti-communist, anti-China kind of stuff. And I mean,
that McCarrick is the architect of the deal.
Yes. Oh yeah, McCarrick is like somehow, the great mastermind behind everything.
I mean, that's the narrative. It's that McCarrick was rehabilitated despite Pope Francis knowing that he was an abuser, and promoted and sent to China sent to work with China on that deal. Whereas if you actually read the emails, it's and sorry to interrupt, but it's like,
that's okay.
It's McCarrick, like McCarrick's former secretary released a bunch of emails, for example, some of which were to Cardinal Parolin, the Vatican Secretary of State, and to Pope Francis. And it would be McCarrick saying, "Oh, I've been in touch with this person from China, and next time I'm in Rome, you'll certainly want to meet with me." Or, "Oh, I'm going to be in China if you'd like me to deliver a message for so-and-so." I mean, it was sort of like I got the impression that McCarrick was looking for validation, or he was trying to make himself feel important, or that he was participating. Yeah. It wasn't that he was at the center of these negotiations. Now, he certainly wanted to be, and he would put himself, he would, in the most positive light or most helpful light possible. But it wasn't, obviously, the fact that he had to hope he would be able to report back afterwards didn't quite sound like somebody who was tasked with arranging the deal.
Yeah, this is a subject we could probably spend a whole show talking about this, about how McCarrick has become an almost mythological figure for a lot of people. And I mean, don't get me wrong, McCarrick was not a good guy. He was an abuser. He did a sexual abuser. He did bad things, and I would never try to justify those things in any way. And I'm glad that he is where he is right now in sort of exile. And I'm glad that all came out. But at the same time, I was shocked in 2018 when the McCarrick scandal broke, and I was reading about it, and I was kind of, sickened and a bit sickened and disappointed, I think, because it was like, wow, this is it's the same thing we've seen a million times in the church playing out again. It's this kind of, a history of sort of subtle grooming and abuse, and then, a lot of lying and covering up and that sort of thing. And then it comes out later on. And this person was living something of a double life, or at least, covering it up and pretending it hadn't happened. But it became like, McCarrick became like the monster, like the sort of, embodiment of evil in the church. And I think a lot of that was Vigano's doing, because Vigano placed him at the center of what he tried to say was like this grand sort of homosexual pedophile conspiracy. That was the real power behind the Vigano letter. It wasn't just that he was calling out Pope Francis and McCarrick, but he was also implanting this idea that McCarrick is just like, now we're seeing this great homosexual conspiracy exposed, right? And the implication was that Pope Francis was connected to it or part of it or somehow. So yeah, I think he's become a really interesting figure, and it's the same with the China deal. I mean, you would imagine that he was like one of the biggest, players in the Vatican and on the world stage when it came to, China and stuff. But the reality of it is so mundane, as it often is with a lot of these cases. When you dig into them, it's yeah, the reality is kind of depressing and mundane. I think that's what the McCarrick report, really showed. One of the people who is speaking at the conference, the Patrick Coffin conference, is someone I thought it'd be worth noting just at the end, because people should keep an eye out for this figure, Liz Yore. So it's Liz at Yore, Yore, and she runs a website called Your Children. I don't see her on Catholic Twitter all that much. She's there, but I see her all the time on Steve Bannon's show, because War Room Pandemic.
God love you for watching that.
Yeah, oh yeah, I check in on War Room Pandemic.
Is our friend Frank Walker still a regular on that?
I haven't seen Frank, or I haven't heard Frank on the show in a while. Stephen Mosher is on the show sometimes. But it seems that Liz Yore has become the go-to sort of Vatican sort of expert, right? And she is absolutely 100% a follower and advocate of Archbishop Vigano even now. She, again, seems to think that McCarrick was the architect of so much that went wrong in the church, and the architect behind the China deal. And she also comes from this world. She used to, she was a lawyer, I believe, and involved in advocacy about human trafficking. And again, this is one of those subjects that I think people need to watch out for as well. Because again, it's like with the China stuff, there's legitimate discourse around the subject of human trafficking. When we're talking about human trafficking is a global problem, and that includes child trafficking. And there are lots of organizations that are involved in this. The UN is involved in trying to solve this problem. The Vatican is involved in trying to solve this problem. But it's often, again, it's more mundane and difficult and complicated than a lot of people will admit. And it seems like Liz Yore is someone who came from, originally might have been a legitimate part of this world of advocacy about human trafficking, but has kind of entered into sort of conspiracy realm. And I think, she was on The World Over, actually, not that long ago, I believe, talking to Raymond Arroyo about child trafficking. And I would just say to people, be very careful of stuff like this. There are people who are talking about things that are genuinely important. Like, it is important to talk about China. It is important to talk about child trafficking. It is important to talk about all these things.
Abortion. I mean, that's
abortion. Yeah. It's like, these are like crucial
it's like
issues.
They're almost trying. It's a counter witness to embrace this unreality, to lose this grip on critical thinking, and to advocate for conspiracy theories, even if what you're promoting is a moral truth. I mean, I've seen so many Catholics who say, I want nothing to do with the pro-life label anymore.
Yeah.
Because of what they've witnessed. Now, I haven't given up on the pro-life label.
Neither have I. I'm okay saying pro-life too.
But I think it needs a recalibration. I mean, I'm worried about the mainstream. I'm worried. The mainstream pro-life movement has, in a lot of ways, and I think the last 4 or 5 years have really shaped it in quite a way. But I mean, they've done so much. I mean, their cause is so noble, yet,
and it's a cause where they have science and truth. Like, we, as pro-lifers, we have science and truth on our side. I believe. I think that everything about this idea that the unborn children should have rights, that that these are humans, that these are humans deserving of protection. I mean, all that is rooted in science, and it's an incredibly firm foundation for a movement. And to just throw it all away by jumping onto these various bandwagons, whether it's the QAnon human trafficking sort of bandwagon, or whether it's the anti-COVID stuff, or whether, there's all these different streams of conspiracy theory that I'm sure get the hits. They get a lot of people, a lot of people looking at your site, but they do incredible damage. I mean, the damage that someone like Abby Johnson did by going to the protest on January 6th in the Capitol is just immense. And
well, it's not just her. I mean, she was an attendee. There were speakers there the Jericho March had Bishop Strickland leading a prayer. It had Taylor Marshall on stage. I mean, it wasn't, and there was a priest that was helping to MC the whole thing. Anyway, well, to end on that, we should probably wrap it up. So what we didn't get to in this hour was talking about the Q Into the Storm documentary and the origins of QAnon. And so I'm thinking that maybe what David and I do is record a little 15-minute supplement for our Patreon subscribers to talk about QAnon and what we've learned and where that whole thing is, that whole thing is today. But any closing words though for this broadcast?
I will say that I'm not out to cancel these people, any of these people that we're talking about. We were talking about Liz Yore there and the stuff that she's been saying about the Pope and about China. I think a lot of these people started out as people with, good intentions, and a lot of them are intelligent people. But something went wrong along the way. And I just encourage, anyone to keep in mind that there's a way back. There's a way you can get out of this conspiratorial way of thinking. You don't need to keep going all in. It's difficult because you might have to admit that you were wrong, and you might have to admit that you said things that may have hurt others, but there's a way back.
Okay. Yeah, I hope so. And we'll and on the next edition of The Critical Catholic, or eventually we'll come up with some, or I'm sure David has some very good thoughts on how to do that. I'm just asking the questions. So anyway, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. If you're a Patreon subscriber, great. You can watch within an hour or so, you'll be able to view our little 15-minute supplement on the QAnon documentary. And until next time, God bless and take care.